Les gens sont obligés d'aller dans la rue. Pourquoi? Parce que quand on va au Parlement, ils n'écoutent pas.
Tonight, as Canada hosts Day 1 of the G7 in Charlevoix, Quebec, protesters take to the streets.
We're in no position to speak about any of the cause, any of the factors.
The investigation continues into the fatal car crash that took the lives of 5 from Maskwacis. And just a handful of puppies rescued so far from wildfire-evacuated communities in Manitoba. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. Day 1 of the G7 was all about U.S. President Donald Trump, with many now calling the meeting the G6 plus Trump, as he promised to push his America First policy amid reports he didn't want to be there in the first place. But as APTN's Todd Lamoran reports, it all began with smiles and handshakes.
It was a brief photo op, and it hid the tension leading up to it. Because controversy followed Trump even before the wheels of Air Force One touched the ground, and he was welcomed onto Innu territory. He expressed a desire to have Russia rejoin the G7 that had been kicked out of the then G8 in 2014. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, responded later in the day.
Russia, however, made clear that it had no interest in behaving according to the rules of Western democracies. And it made that very clear with the invasion of Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, the continued support for the war in eastern Ukraine, and continued attacks on our democracies, not least of which was the recent attack in Salisbury.
But today's meeting focused on trade and tariffs, a last-ditch attempt to stop a trade war between the U.S. and Canada and the European Union. Trump, in a series of tweets, took aim at Canada's supply-managed dairy industry, complaining about a 300% tariff on U.S. dairy by Canada. It was all smiles, however, when Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau shook hands for the cameras. It was again Minister Freeland who spoke out against the tariffs on steel and aluminum imposed by the U.S.
So this is an illegal act. It is absolutely unjustified. Canada has already raised cases at the WTO and at NAFTA, and we will retaliate. But we say that with great sadness.
Perhaps the most dire remarks came from Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council. He said the U.S. was threatening the international order of rules-based democracies.
You will not stop trying to convince our American friends and President Trump that undermining this order makes no sense at all, because it would only play into the hands of those who seek a new post-West order, where liberal democracy and fundamental freedoms would cease to exist.
President Trump already plans to leave the summit this evening, so he won't be attending sessions tomorrow on gender equality, climate change, and clean energy. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Quebec City.
Protests in the streets of Quebec City have been ongoing since Thursday. Aside from a couple of arrests, they have so far been pretty peaceful. Tom Fenario was there and spoke with some of the Indigenous activists participating.
After blocking a 4-lane boulevard, about 100 anti-G7 activists were met with nearly an equal amount of police officers.
Les gens sont obligés d'aller dans la rue. Pourquoi? Parce que quand on va au Parlement, ils n'écoutent pas.
On s'en va sur le trottoir. The demonstration was corralled off the streets by police in about an hour. Protesters did not have the numbers to resist.
Anti-capitaliste!
Yet despite the low turnout here, activists are still declaring victory by pointing to the shutdown of provincial government.
On a gagné. Il y a 10 000 fonctionnaires qui sont en congé aujourd'hui parce que l'État a peur. L'État a peur du peuple.
Friday morning's action is just one protest of many to take place over the next few days. Although Prime Minister Trudeau is trumpeting the topics of this year's G7 as progressive, activists say that having issues such as the environment on the program is negated by Canada's recent buying of the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
J'ai l'impression des fois qu'ils jouent sur deux jeux. Un pied dans le G7 avec l'État, avec les chefs d'État, un pied chez le peuple, juste pour que le peuple ait confiance en lui.
Shani Piap was one of several activists to take part in Thursday evening's march through the streets of Quebec City. Andre Piku-Telecan of Maskwacis First Nation expressed deep disappointment in the First Nation chiefs who chose to serve as ambassadors to the G7 summit.
Et j'espère que le Créateur éclairera certains de ses chefs pour que ceux-ci ne tournent plus le dos à nos ancêtres, que ces élus soient à l'écoute des défenseurs de notre culture et marchent aux côtés des protecteurs des territoires.
Nelly is a Mapuche activist originally from Chile. She's protesting not only on behalf of her people, but for oppressed indigenous peoples everywhere.
La gran partie de la population est dans la pauvreté, et pas seulement au Canada, sino que à travers le monde entier.
But Nelly's global perspective does not seem to apply to demonstrations here. Unlike anti-globalization movements of the past, activists from outside the province have not descended on Quebec City en masse. But perhaps that will change. Saturday afternoon, we'll see a large demonstration in front of Quebec's National Assembly. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Quebec City.
And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. The Senate has voted to legalize cannabis, but the bill has a few hurdles ahead before it becomes law. And some MPs fear there isn't enough time before the summer break.
Mr. Speaker, today is June 8, only 3 short weeks away from the Liberals' declared July 1 deadline for cannabis legalization. Talk about a plan going up in smoke.
The Senate made more than 40 amendments to the cannabis bill, which means it must go back to the House of Commons for approval. The Liberal government said it will carefully look at the changes. Major political story in Ontario today. There's a new boss coming for Canada's biggest province. With no experience in provincial politics, former city councillor and business owner Doug Ford took over the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party just months ago and is now set to become the premier at the end of the month.
I'm always fair to the media, and I just want to go on record. Steph, you've always been fair to me. Always, and always treated me like gold when I'm here. So I don't think too many things will change. I expect the media has to ask tough questions, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And sure, sometimes you get frustrated listening to the media, but that's every politician. It doesn't matter what stripe you are.
Doug Ford will become Ontario's 26th premier on June 29th. It was a horrific crash that claimed the lives of 5 people. We'll bring you the latest from Maskwacis after the break. Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. A sunny high of 20 for Fredericton, a soggy high of 7 in St. John's. Just +6 with rain for Happy Valley Goose Bay, 3 in Nain, 13 in Sept-Îles and Chibougamau, 21 under the sun in Quebec City. In southern Ontario, 24 in London, Toronto and Peterborough, 23 in Sudbury and Wawa, 16 is the high for Thunder Bay. A warm day in northern Manitoba, 19 in Churchill, 26 in Norway House. Rain for Winnipeg with a high of 22, 25 in Barons River. A scorcher in parts of Saskatchewan, 30 in Swift Current and Saskatoon. 29 with rain in Meadow Lake, rain, and 28 in Buffalo Narrows. Welcome back. Earlier this week, a horrible car crash in Alberta claimed the lives of 5 members of the Maskwacis community. Now families and leadership are mourning their loss. APTN's Chris Stewart has the story.
Maskwacis has lost 5 young people in a head-on collision on the 2A highway, about 30 minutes south of Edmonton. The impact was so forceful that 4 of the victims were pronounced dead at the scene of the accident. Killed were 3 sisters. Dominic Soucy Northwest, 19, Cheyenne Soucy Northwest, 22, and Letitia Soucy Northwest, 25, all from Samson Cree Nation. Anthony Swampy from Sampson and his girlfriend, Terrell Mindy from Ermineskin, were also killed. Sampson Chief Vernon Saddleback was at a loss for words.
It's tough to lose one family member, but when you lose 5 from a community, that's what, words can't express. I honestly don't know what to say about it. It's just, part of this, I'm still in shock myself.
Wetaskiwin and RCMP are investigating the cause of the accident. The driver of the second car was treated for minor injuries and released.
A collision of this gravity takes quite a while to investigate. So we're in no position to speak about any of the cause, any of the factors. We're looking into every factor.
The community and families have asked for privacy.
It's tough. It's emotional. It's a really tough time for everyone.
1 fatality is tough. 5 is such a tragedy.
A GoFundMe campaign has been set up to help the families. It has reached nearly $4,000 of its $5,000 goal in just 1 day. The first funeral for the victims will be held tomorrow. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
The evacuations and the death toll continues to rise in Guatemala. 5 days ago, a violent volcanic eruption spewed lava, rock, and ash so quickly that residents had little time to get out of the way. Ottawa resident and human rights activist Ben Paulus joins us from Guatemala now. Ben, thanks for taking some time for us here today. I guess let's start with what you're doing there in Guatemala.
Well, I arrived in Guatemala about 5 or 6 days ago, and we heard that there had been this volcanic eruption. I was here to visit some friends, kind of a vacation kind of thing. But it was such a heartbreaking tragedy finding out that all these communities had been destroyed, primarily indigenous communities, by this volcano. So we basically got to work. We started raising some funds. We've been visiting rescue workers and people who have been affected by this tragedy, trying to see what we can do.
Can you explain a little bit about what you've seen, what it's been like for the people there on the ground?
It's been, I would say, very, very difficult. So far, the government says that there's over 100 people that have died, but we've visited rescue workers who tell us that there's hundreds of people still missing. The zone that was affected by the volcanic eruption is still too hot for rescue workers to enter, and so it may be days, it may be longer before rescue workers are even able to gain access and even confirm the amount of people who have succumbed, unfortunately, to this tragedy. We've also been told that rescue workers, don't even have enough tools, don't even have enough equipment to fulfill their job safely, and so it's a very precarious and dire situation for everybody.
Startling images coming out of there. You're saying there's not the tools aren't there. What's needed? How can people help out?
Well, we've actually started a GoFundMe fundraiser, so GoFundMe.com. We've raised over $80,000 at this point. We're actually going to be traveling to Guatemala City next week to actually try and buy some equipment for rescue workers that we've been in touch with that have told us what some of their needs are. We're also going to be trying to support some of the people who have been evacuated. As mentioned, some entire communities have been lost, have been destroyed. So people don't even have homes to return to, and so they're anticipating being in these kind of shelters for months. Afterwards, there's going to be a lot of need for rebuilding, for reconstruction, and I think that there's a big need for even the Canadian government, other governments to step in and contribute some funds as well.
Pretty devastating stuff. Ben, appreciate you taking some time to join us here. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Today is World Oceans Day, and this year's theme is preventing plastic pollution. According to the World Economic Forum, about 8 million tons of plastic are dumped into our oceans every year, with 80% of that trash coming from humans. And if we keep producing and failing to properly dispose of the plastics at predicted rates, it's believed plastics in the ocean will outweigh fish pound for pound by 2050. Some awful viz. Meanwhile, Swedish retail giant IKEA has announced plans to eliminate all single-use plastic products by 2020. These products include things like straws, plates, cups, freezer, and garbage bags. The changes will take effect before the end of 2019 across all IKEA retail markets, including here in Canada. The move comes as a part of the company's global commitment to help customers live more sustainably. Good news for just a small number of those pets stranded in northern Manitoba. Details coming up after the break. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather outlook. Picking back up in northern Alberta. Rain and 28 in Fort McMurray, 18 in Grand Prairie. A real hot one in Medicine Hat with a high of 33 under the sun, 25 in Calgary and Red Deer. On the west coast, 16 in Vancouver, 15 in Victoria, 14 in Port Hardy, 16 in rain in Fort Nelson, 18 in Fort St. John. In the Yukon, showers and a high of 19 for Rock River. Fort NWT, 14 with rain in Fort Liard and Trout Lake, 19 in Yellowknife. A high of -2 in Sax Harbor, 0 in Paulatuck. A warmer day in Nunavut, 8 for Arviette, 4 in Baker Lake and Chesterfield, +2 on Saturday in Talioke, Igloolik, Pangertung, and Iqaluit. Welcome back. For Indigenous youth looking to get in touch with traditional supports, city high schools may not be the first place they think of. But one inner-city school in Winnipeg is trying to change that. As Brittany Hobson shows us, they are also leading the way in Indigenous education across Manitoba.
Trevor Creeley is putting the finishing touches on one of his final projects. The 17-year-old is getting ready to graduate from R.B. Russell Vocational High School, a school he's been at for the past 3 years.
I'm really going to miss it. I'll probably even come back when I'm not even a student just to come to the welding shop.
The teen will be taking a welding course in post-secondary school in the fall. He credits much of his success to his instructors at R.B. Russell.
The teachers are really nice here. They're almost like friends. They're not like someone you can only talk about school with. You can actually talk about personal stuff.
Located in Winnipeg's North End, R.B. Russell is a predominantly Indigenous populated school. About 90% of the students identify as Indigenous. It is quietly becoming one of the leading schools in Winnipeg to implement and foster Indigenous practices as part of high school education.
We smudge every morning. We create that opportunity for students. If they want to, they can. If they don't want to, that's fine, but that's here for us.
Sandra Costa is a teacher at the school. In her classroom, students are learning their traditional language while also working on their regular curriculum. R.B. Russell relies on elders in the community to bring in traditional knowledge and teachings. That's because the textbooks haven't been written yet.
There is no knowledge or curriculum for the teachers to use. And right now, we're looking at a non-Indigenous, non-Aboriginal, white Canadian history, social studies, geography. It's not from our perspective at all.
School elder Roxanne Shuttleworth says more often than not, it's the students who are asking her to come into the classroom. Back in the welding shop, Mike Johnston gives his students a place to work on passion projects.
It gives kids a space. Trevor comes visit me every day during his math class just to hang out for 5 or 10 minutes, and it's a welcoming space where they can get creative and find something they have a passion for.
For some students like Kayla Creeley, the school has become a home away from home.
We can relate with each other and stuff like that. Like my friend, me and her have a lot of situations that we go through, and they're very similar, and yeah, we just talk in it.
The school celebrated its 50th anniversary last year, and most recently, staff and students completed a sweat lodge and had their first ceremony. Jackie Connell, principal at R.B. Russell, says her goal is to decolonize the education system, and more schools are looking at R.B. Russell as an example to do that.
I think that more and more often schools are looking for authentic and meaningful ways to integrate Indigenous education and culture into curriculum. And if what we're doing is inspiring to other people or buildings or schools or divisions, I am absolutely happy to collaborate like any opportunity we get.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Royal Saskatchewan Museum will be hosting events all of June for National Indigenous History Month, and we're there to cover them. APTN's Tamara Pimentel went to a film screening at the museum where one woman shares her experience working for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
To take them away from their families.
When Trudy Stewart listened to survivors' stories while working for the TRC, she found her connection to the residential school legacy.
There's a misconception that if you didn't go to residential school, or if you had grew up maybe like me, a 60 scoop survivor, not in an Indigenous home, that you weren't affected. And I found that I was actually quite affected, and came to that realization working for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I wanted to, I guess, get across that you can be affected quite deeply without having gone to school.
Maybe the other stuff wouldn't have happened.
She tells her story in the film From Up North, a personal short documentary she created alongside Janine Windolf. In the film, Stewart speaks to Elder Noel Starblanket, who shares his experiences of attending the LeBret Indian Residential School.
It's still painful, but that being said, the truth has to be told. And it's only when the truth is told that people free themselves. And people free themselves to forgive. That's what my elders have told me.
From Up North was one of 3 films featured at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum's Indigenous History Month celebration. People of all ages and ethnicities sat in the audience.
It gives me great pride and pleasure to know that these non-Indigenous people are accepting these truths and our worldview and all of that. So where there used to be prejudice and bias and all of that, there is now more understanding.
As painful as they may be, Stewart and Starblanket say it's important to tell these stories on Indigenous History Month, to build bridges between nations and to educate. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Regina.
There is some good news to pass along tonight about the stranded dogs we told you about last night. More than 700 animals had to be left behind in 2 northern Manitoba First Nations evacuated last month due to wildfires. Yesterday, some of those dogs were flown out of Pungazi. 19 puppies were rescued by a coalition of animal rescue groups. Red Cross is working with the groups to feed all the pets left behind. The evacuation agreement with the federal government does not cover pets. In a letter to Indigenous Services Canada, Norway House Animal Rescue called the situation a crisis. Efforts are continuing to get more dogs out of the 2 evacuated communities. And we wish them all the luck in those endeavors. That's your APTN National News for this Friday. For more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great weekend.